Racial tensions on the rise.
What we gonna do about tomorrow, sister?
How did we get here?
We wasn't causing any harm to nobody. We had no weapons on us at all.
A young man, Michael Brown, was shot and killed by a Ferguson police officer.
You took my son away from me. You know how hard it was for me to get him to stay in school and graduate?
Tensions rise as Brown's body lay there for hours.
So we needed to make sure that the crime scene was safe.
No justice, no peace.
Protests began. A peaceful vigil turns violent.
You said you're scared. What are you seeing?
I'm seeing people doing stuff like breaking into stores and stuff and just doing bad stuff.
What stores did they break into?
Quick Trip.
What did they take out? Did you see them run out with anything?
Everything. They destroy everything.
There has been no rush to judgment on this case.
We gotta be out here with the people if we want some justice.
As darkness set, violence began again.
Rock him up, justice! Rock him up now!
Don't be a traitor to Michael Brown in the name of you, man.
No justice!
And another officer-involved shooting.
Instead of burning bridges in anger, we must rebuild them with love.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Sharon Reed.
And I'm Steve Savard. We're here inside Studio B at KMOV tonight, and we just want to talk.
We do. So much of what we've seen in our community is jarring. It's a lot to take in. So tonight, a candid conversation, one with no boundaries.
Our guests tonight have varying viewpoints. They have different experiences and different perspectives. They're all here tonight to have a community conversation.
So let's get right to it. Introducing our guest, Chief Tom Jackson with the Ferguson Police Department, Esther Haywood with the NAACP, President, St. Louis County, and Bishop Edwin Bass, President, Church of God in Christ Urban Initiatives.
Michael McMillan, CEO and President, Urban League of St. Louis. James Clark, Vice President, Better Family Life Incorporated, and Mayor James Knowles of Ferguson.
Also in our audience, Norm White is an associate professor of criminology and criminal justice at SLU. Mike Fitzgerald from Incarnate Word Foundation. He's on the Youth Violence Prevention Task Force, and of course, our investigative reporter, Craig Cheatham, joins us as well.
We're here tonight because a young man, Michael Brown, was killed on Saturday, and the facts about his death are being sorted out. We all want the truth to come out, and every day since the tragedy, we have had numerous calls for a fair and thorough investigation. Now, we know this. The world will be watching, yet some clearly are skeptical. My first question to our panelists tonight, do any of you doubt that a fair conclusion can be reached through either investigation done by the St. Louis County Police or the FBI? Ms. Haywood?
I truly feel that with the St. Louis County turning it over to the FBI and the Justice Department, along with the effort of St. Louis County, there will be justice.
Anybody else want to chime in?
How about you, Michael?
Well, we definitely agree with that. The Urban League is advocating, along with the NAACP and the Clergy Coalition, for the Justice Department to have exclusive control over the investigation.
If I could follow up with you, Chief.
Sure.
In many ways, it's protocol to turn this investigation over in a circumstance like this, but how does it make you feel, your department's reputation on the line?
Well, I think it's really important that we do get a fair and factual, truthful conclusion to this investigation. We all want the same thing. We want the truth and we want justice. There would be an appearance of impropriety if I had tried to conduct this investigation myself. As soon as I found out about the shooting, I had contacted Police Chief Belmer and asked him to go to the scene, have his people go to the scene, and take complete control of the investigation. So I'm very, very confident that they will come to the right conclusion.
Are we at more risk in the future based on the investigation's findings, how this turns out, and how do we get ahead of that and minimize any sort of violent reaction some may have in this community? James?
Well, I think that the outcome is going to be very, very important. I think that we must be able to have a fair conclusion, knowing that if the individual is exonerated, that there will be severe backlash. We cannot emphasize that it's a very, very volatile and it's a very, very fluid situation right now. And there are other benchmarks along the way. The young man's funeral is going to be another milestone that we have to be able to effectively mediate as much as we possibly can. So this is a very, very high-pitched, high-profile situation that is right now, for all involved, it's out of control.
Bishop, I know you want to say something, and black churches have been an integral part of this, meeting places, organizing with the protesters. What's really behind? What's at the root of this violence?
Well, let me first make a comment on the last question. If you look at justice as the destination, that's a critical destination, but the journey itself also is very important. So the disclosure of information, the community feeling that all information is readily available to the community, that things are rolling along at appropriate speed, correctly, are all part of resulting in a good end and good destination and good conclusion to this matter.
But Chief, how much information can be made public in an investigation like this? That's the rub here, is it not?
It is the rub, and it's frustrating to me as well. But the thing is, we have a whole bunch of witnesses out there who've come forward and need to be interviewed, and we need to get that information without it being clouded by facts from the case being already out there. So it's happening slowly, and I would really like to ask the county to put out more information, but they really can't at this point. They will. It'll come out.
We heard from the county prosecutor, Bob McCullough, this afternoon. We took that live, talking about what he could and couldn't do and the process moving forward. A key piece of information that's not out there is the name of the officer. Can you speak to that?
Yes, I can. So first of all, it's Bob McCullough's office policy that they don't release the name of anyone who's being investigated until they're formally charged. But we recognize that this is an important piece of information that needs to come out. What happened right before we were prepared to do that was the name of another officer on my department was released as being the shooter. And he wasn't, but his name went up on Facebook or this other social media websites, and it just was a disaster for him. He started receiving death threats. He had to take his family out of town. So we had to sit down and weigh the benefit to the public and to the media of releasing that information right now, or against the safety of the officer, his family, and his neighbors, the officer who was wrongly identified. And so we did make that decision, of course, with Bob McCullough saying he wasn't going to release the name either. But we made that decision internally that we needed to hold off on that for a little bit.
Well, Mayor, your city's taken a hit nationally. Can you speak to what can be done moving forward?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, there's going to be other milestones ahead, and there's going to be sensitivities that rise at each milestone, such as the releasing of the findings of the investigation, releasing of any other pertinent information, and of course this funeral. So I think, though, as we mentioned, we have to be showing that we are making steps, that we are talking, that we're hearing, and we're looking at moving forward as each of those milestones progress, because we don't want people to think that once this subsides that we just turned our back and not doing anything about their concerns. We wanted to let people know that we're hearing what they're saying. We want to engage those people. We want to start having meaningful dialogue about moving forward. So,
if I can interrupt you, Mayor, what steps specifically? What are you hearing, and what steps?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of people who across the nation, there's a divide between young people and law enforcement, especially young African Americans. A lot of times in law enforcement, it's something that we hear about law enforcement not understanding young people, not understanding the community. So we need to look at ways that we can continue to engage those communities with law enforcement, making them feel part of the greater community in Ferguson and across the country, and as well as having more positive interactions with law enforcement, whether it be through school resource officer programs and others. And it's unfortunate, but over the years, especially with education funding dropping, that the first thing to go besides sports is school resource officer programs. The city of Ferguson, as Ferguson-Florissant School District, has eliminated those. We have undertaken the funding to make those stay. They are officers, school resource officers. They help bridge the gap between young people and law enforcement.
Well, we solicited some questions from viewers tonight on both Facebook and also Twitter.
That's right, and Instagram. This is from Travis Ferguson. The one question he says that needs an answer is all this violence really the answer to the problem? Is the violence really respecting his memory? And Michael, if you could speak to that.
Well, absolutely not. We all understand the outrage and the disgust that is in the community about this tragedy, and we're dealing with a generation of people that feel hopeless in many ways because of lack of educational opportunities, lack of jobs, lack of good housing, and an overall quality of life that most people enjoy. But violence is not the answer. We have to stop all of the rioting, all of the violence, all of the negativity that has transpired, and pay respect to this young man and let the process continue on in terms of the FBI's investigation. Peaceful protest is what we should be doing, and trying to make sure that we live up to the history of the civil rights movement and paying legacy to his life.
Ms. Haywood, you were nodding your head while Michael was giving that answer, the eloquent answer?
Very much so. Very much.
You echo his thoughts?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But what can be done, Ms. Haywood, to make sure that the violence isn't just quelled, but it doesn't bubble up again and again?
Well, hopefully, we would have to remember that many of the people that are out there are not from the community. Many of them are transplants brought in, sent in, and they hear about it. And I can imagine that opportunity presented itself there wherever it is.
Bishop Bass, you wanted to weigh in?
Yeah, I think also an acknowledgement that despair and frustration does not breed logical behavior. I think we've got an excellent example of that, the alleged suicide of Robin Williams as a result of frustration and despair allegedly caused him to take his life. Obviously an illogical approach. I think if the community would acknowledge that fact, that some people are not going to act in a logical way, and that's probably not unusual. At the same time, we are of the same mind that we're trying to encourage the community to avoid violence and to respect the memory of the young man who was killed by acting appropriately in the community.
Now, we also received questions about the makeup of the Ferguson Police Department. There is a significant disparity between the racial makeup of the community in Ferguson and the Ferguson Police Department.
Would a more racially diverse police force here in Ferguson have made a difference, in your opinion, in the last 2 or 3 days?
I think, of course, it would not have made a difference.
Right now, the Ferguson Police Department has 53 officers, but only 3 are black. Compare that to the data from the latest census, showing 63% of Ferguson is African American. Pastor Spencer Lamar Booker of the St. Paul AME Church met with Chief Jackson Tuesday.
One that is sworn to protect or serve, whether black or white, must be accountable for their action.
There were more minority officers in the past, but they left for better job offers from other departments. Pastor Booker believes a more racially diverse police force would improve relations between the department and the community.
But I believe that with commitment from Chief Jackson and his family, the police officers of this city, it can happen.
We received a question via Twitter on this very topic from Susan Massey. What can Ferguson city leaders do to create more positive relations between all citizens in the community? And Chief Jackson, you and I talked about this just yesterday, and you were very, very candid about the lack of black officers in your department. You had more in the past, lost them to better paying jobs.
I did.
Tell us a little bit about your efforts to change those numbers and to recruit young people.
Well, losing them to better paying jobs, it sparks the discussion about retention. We want to be able to recruit, retain a diverse workforce. So when I got to the Ferguson Police Department 4.5 years ago, in a very short time I promoted the first 2 African-American sergeants in the history of the department. And I had and I hired additional African-American officers, put one through the academy, and but lost them to better paying jobs. The officers called me and said they'd like to come back, you know, after going to those jobs because they loved working here. But so we were able to, the mayor had a leadership role in this, in raising the starting pay of our police department by 11% last year. We believe this is going to help us in the future to recruit and retain. We also have improved the overall quality of life in the police department by adding better equipment, better training, more training, We're doing improvements to the police station itself. We've gotten improved vehicles. So just the kind of things that make somebody want to come and work for a police department and stay at the police department.
James Clark, a follow-up with you from the perspective of just beyond Ferguson. Let's just talk about Ferguson, but communities as a whole. How do we get young adults in communities where there is a distrust of law enforcement interested in going into law enforcement?
Well, I think that we've got to go back and look at how the police department used to engage the community. You know, as a young man coming up in North St. Louis, police officers were our friends. They frequented the neighborhood. During football season, they passed out football cards. During baseball season, they would drive by and give us baseball cards. We had the Officer Friendly program that at a very young age endeared us to police officers. Over the years, the relationship has eroded. And I think that not just the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department or the Ferguson Police Department, all law enforcement needs to do a better job of engaging particularly the African American community, because there's a very strong distrust there, and it's not going to go away, and it's getting progressively worse.
So, Mr. Clark, we'll stay with you. Is that going back to community policing, boots on the ground, making sure that you know the young people who are in your neighborhood and community for police?
Absolutely. Police officers have to gain the trust of the community by being active in the community. They have gotten away from that. Maybe it's because of the increased calls, or maybe it's because of budget cuts, but they really have to do a better job in proactively, casually engaging the African American community and dealing with younger people. We are talking as early as 5 and 6 years old. They need to start engagement there.
To your point, we ran a story on News 4 a few months ago about 2 Kansas City police officers during the course of their watch stopping in a city neighborhood, shutting down the street, and playing 2-on-2 basketball with a couple of 12-year-olds. Those are the that's the kind of thing you're referencing here, you're talking about?
Yes.
You think that would make a difference, Bishop?
I absolutely do. And if you juxtaposition that against the alleged events that led to this, that a young man was stopped because he was walking in the street, and you compare that to what you could have from community policing, the question is how sensitive are the police, and how sensitive should they be to perhaps overlooking minimal kinds of breaking of the law or some regulation in the interest of serving the broader long-term purpose of establishing relationship in the community. So I would suggest that perhaps the best way to handle this one would have been for the policeman to overlook a kid walking in the street. That was not big. Yeah, it was not big enough to further deteriorate the relationship between the policeman and the community.
Mayor, where do you go from here with such a lack of trust and police on your department being looked at as antagonists? Where do you go from here?
Well, I think as was already mentioned, I think we need to find more positive outlets to have officers involved in these young people's lives. We have had over the past several years several of our officers, and including myself, as I'm not an officer, but we both were coaches at McClure South Berkeley High School. One of our other African-American officers, I believe we've had 2 over the years who've been coaches at McClure South Berkeley. So I mean, we've had these positive interactions with local leaders, with local law enforcement, but we really need to expand that. I mean, we need to find ways to provide opportunities for those kind of positive interactions, those kind of mentoring interactions. And so I think as was mentioned before, we've had these programs in the past, but I think unfortunately as budget cuts happen, as we've mentioned about SRO programs through the schools have happened, they start to go by the wayside, and we need to go back to that.
Chief Jackson, another question from Facebook. It comes from Krista Harder. She asks, do the officers that patrol Ferguson live in Ferguson? And if not, why is that not a requirement?
It's not a requirement. We do have several officers who do live in the city of Ferguson. We provide incentives. They get additional pay if they live within the city limits, and they also are eligible for the resident officer program where they get a car to take home.
With the eye of the country on our area, a well-known civil rights activist made it clear he was coming to town. And indeed, the Reverend Al Sharpton showed up here and really found himself a key figure in this controversy. Did his presence help ease tension?
Don't be a traitor to Michael Brown in the name of you, man.
The Reverend Al Sharpton on the old courthouse steps pushing back against the outbreak of violence. He urged calm.
I think his message today was a good message. You know, what he talked about was everybody heeding the wishes of the family.
Political leaders and Michael Brown's parents right there by his side. It's clear the family is embracing Sharpton's presence. Is the family grateful for that presence?
Yes, we are. We did not come to divide the city.
Early yesterday afternoon, and then there was this last night. The tone a little different.
No justice. What do we want? What do we want? What do we want? When do we want it? When do we want it? When do we want it? All right.
And so with that, this is something that comes up whenever Al Sharpton comes to town. And Michael McMillan, I want to put it to you. The question, does the Reverend Al Sharpton's presence help the cause here, or can it hurt it?
Well, I think Reverend Sharpton made national attention come to this matter in a more significant way than had been the case in the past. And I believe his message of nonviolence, of paying respect to the family, and making sure that the federal government is in charge of the investigation is one that we can all agree with and support, and I think his presence helped.
Chief, I saw you nodding your head. Do you agree that Reverend Al Sharpton's presence here is a good thing?
I do. And the rhetoric toward the police department aside, that was a very important message. And I was, while he was here and marching out with the protesters that evening, I was being texted by Bishop G, who's one of our local pastors, and he texted me, all is well here, peace has arrived, and everything was calm. So his message resonated, that message of nonviolence, and that's really the message that I want, you know, just protest, just nonviolently.
Ms. Haywood, can you speak to that?
Truthfully, Al Sharpton truly is a motivator when it comes to areas. But of course, he's different from the teaching of the NAACP.
How so?
Well, we believe in the same thing, but we just present it in a different way. And it may be that, maybe the little difference there. He's more excitable.
Rhetoric?
More excitable than we are.
You're a little bit more low-key in delivering your message?
Yes, absolutely.
Most people are.
Yeah, so it may, that takes charge sometimes. But we do have the same idea about what we need and what we're going to do. And we're glad that he came, that the family, but what this family is going to need a whole lot of moral support. They're going to need money. They're going to need to bury a son. So right now we need to help them and help the children in the neighborhood. Be surprised at many of the kids that are going back to school. They need help. They need someone to talk with them and tell them what they're hearing. They don't understand it. So therefore, we may look at Ferguson to maybe bring on counselors and pay for some help for the children. You know?
Mr. Clark, can we ask you this? You're the expert when it comes to young, black males in particular. Al Sharpton, is he of too much of an older generation? Do we need a young leader that they'll listen to? Are they listening to him?
Well, you know, I think that Mr. Sharpton's presence does validate this in a big way. But I do think that we do need to be able to engage those and keep their perspective on this issue. We cannot lose focus of the climate that was created by the individuals and the individuals that created it. You know, I was at a meeting last night and I looked around the room and we were in a church field and there were still individuals outside protesting. Their narrative has to remain the focus point throughout this process. We cannot have this become another intellectual discourse and conversations that they're not a part of, because at the root of this are their basic needs. Just as Mr. McMillan said, this is a cry for help. This is a cry for attention. And as it continues to unfold, we've got to remember that. We cannot let this episode occur and not change the paradigm. We've got to be in our neighborhoods. We've got to deliver individuals because we've allowed them to become segregated. They are now isolated, and they have their own subculture. And it's a very, very unsettled subculture that is growing. It doesn't get better, it gets worse.
All the tension we've witnessed over the last few days didn't suddenly surface overnight. When we come back in 90 seconds, we look back at some of the deep-seated beliefs in some of the communities here in the St. Louis area. We'll be right back.